It's a pretty well-known fact that the best tool to make better coffee at home is the coffee burr grinder. But when buying your first grinder can be a very confusing task. Well, in this video, I'm gonna compare these two grinders and tell you which coffee grinder you should buy. Let's go. Hi, my name is Rowsell and I want to help you brew better coffee at home. And in today's video, to do that, I want to compare two home grinders. I want to compare the Baratza Encore with the Breville Smart Grinder Pro. Now, before I go any further, there is a model that is cheaper than this that is more relative to the Baratza Encore. I don't have that, but know that the specs that I'm going to give you and everything I say about this grinder is pretty relative to that Dose Control Pro, the model below this. Now, why would you choose these two grinders? Well, when choosing a home grinder, there are so many options. Grinders can start at $50 and can go up to $4,000 or $5,000. But if you're watching this video, you're probably in the market to buy one of your first electric burr grinders for home. And that's where these two come in at a very, very specific price point. I would consider these two burr grinders to be on the entry level, but producing good coffee. There are grinders that are cheaper than these two, but I wouldn't recommend those. This is probably as cheap as I would go within the home electric burr grinder market. I would recommend these two to anybody at home who wants to brew better coffee in a home setting. So in just a second, we're gonna compare the specs on these. I'm going to do a sifting test to compare the consistency and grind in these. We're gonna do a noise test, and I'm gonna go over all the aesthetic differences and mechanical differences within these grinders as well. The Baratza Encore has 40 adjustment notches for grinding. Within those 40 notches, all of them are for filter. We're gonna come back to that. But the Breville Smart Grinder Pro has 60 notches of adjustment for your grind setting. Within those 60 adjustments, you can pull both espresso and filter. Is this a high-end espresso grinder? No, but it will get you into espresso at home. Now, this is one of the most popular home grinders to ever hit the market. It's been out for over a decade and it is just so popular. Baratza refreshed this grinder in 2020 with this new white model, and they've changed some of the outside aesthetics with a Baratza logo and some different plastics for the hopper and grinds bin, but that doesn't change anything mechanically within this grinder. Baratza is a great company who makes great grinders for home use. Now, I recently compared Baratza's higher end grinder for espresso, the Sette 270, to the Niche Zero. And I'm gonna link that up above right here so that you can check that out. The Baratza Encore comes in at $129 American, which I think is a pretty great value for what it offers. This grinder is great. It's great. And for that money, I don't think you're gonna beat it for filter coffee. It comes in with a 40mm burr set, a burr size that is pretty common for conical burr sets within Baratza's grinders. And the Baratza Encore's burr set is pretty fantastic for filter coffee. Like I've already mentioned, it has 40 stops of adjustments. 40 adjustments is plenty, especially for filter. Now, like I said earlier, this grinder is not gonna be able to do espresso, at least it's not gonna be able to do espresso well. If you're using an espresso machine with a pressurized portafilter, then you shouldn't have an issue, but I wouldn't recommend it. If you're going to be purchasing a grinder for espresso, look elsewhere than the Baratza Encore. It also has a dose bin, so if you want to grind right into a dose bin and you can pour this into your brew method, it's pretty great. So let's talk about some cons real quick with this grinder. Well, first off, obviously it can't brew espresso and it's not designed to. So I'm not gonna give it a huge stock and points for that, but I don't love how messy this grinder is. I find when you pull the grind bin out, it often leaves grounds in the bottom base here and grounds just go everywhere. It doesn't have a timer, which I've never had an issue with because I only single dose. But if you're not single dosing and you're filling up your hopper with beans, it doesn't have a timer, which you'd want to go to something like the Virtuoso instead of the Encore because of that. Okay, let's talk about the Breville Smart Grinder Pro. And like I've already mentioned in this video, there are other grinders within the Breville lineup of grinders for home grinding that fall under the price range of the Smart Grinder Pro. The Smart Grinder Pro comes in at $199. The Breville Smart Grinder Pro also uses a 40mm burr set. The big difference between this grinder and the Baratza Encore is the range that it offers. The Smart Grinder Pro has 60 stops of adjustments for this grinder. You don't have to jump between such big steps in your grind stops. But what that also allows is that it has a wider range in the coffee methods that it can brew. It's not going to brew fantastic espresso, but it will get you into espresso if you don't yet have an espresso grinder. If you want to brew great espresso at home, I wouldn't recommend this grinder, but if you just want to get into espresso at home, I get it. It's a great option for you so that you don't have to break the bank and then you can eventually upgrade. Before you smash me up in the comments down below and negative Nancy start ripping me apart, think about the situation that other people are in because you were there too at one point. The nice thing with the Breville is that it's got a full digital interface. It does time. If you do want to fill up your hopper with beans, you can, but I wouldn't recommend that. I always recommend single dosing. It does come with a dose bin as well, but the nice thing with this grinder is that you can actually attach a piece in here that you can sit your porter filter into. So if you just want to brew espresso, you can do that. It's magnetic and it sits right in here. Okay, so we're gonna do a sound comparison. I've got an app on my phone and I'm gonna be reading the decibel level on each grinder, and then I'm gonna be grinding some coffee through. We're gonna do 20 grams of coffee at a V60 style size of grind. So on my Encore, I often grind between a 10 to a 15 for a V60, and within the Breville Smart Grinder Pro, I'm grinding on the higher end, which is about a 45. One thing else I want to say is I've dialed both of these grinders in to be very similar in grind size. I don't think I can get it any closer, and so we're going to test their sifting consistency. Now the decibel reading was reading about 78 decibels consistently. It got up to about 80 at one point and it dropped down to 74 once almost all the coffee was ground. Now we're gonna be using this tool. It's the Crew Sifter. I used this in my last comparison against the Sette and the Niche. I've changed the sifters to an 800 and a 400 micron sifter. Because we're sifting filter coffee instead of espresso, I thought that would be only fair. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to pour this in the sifter, we're gonna shake it for about 1 minute, and then we're gonna compare how consistent this grinder is to the Smart Grinder Pro. So right away I can see that this has a lot of coarse grinds. This is the 800 micron sifter. This is at grind setting 12 on the Encore, which out of 40 is kind of fine. And so you can see it's still got a lot of coarse grounds. The more consistent a grinder is, the better. As water interacts with it and breaks down the soluble components within the coffee, if it's coarse, it's not allowing as much surface area to interact with the water, and same with the fine. If it's very finely ground, there's more surface area. So you do want it to be as consistent as possible because you will have the best tasting coffee. Hopefully that makes sense. So out of 20 grams, we have 12.6 grams on the coarse grounds. There's about 1.3 grams on the fines and just shy of 6 grams on our results. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us there are a lot of coarse grounds within this grinder. It does grind on the coarse side, and that's something that I knew coming into this test. It is a coarse grinder, but it's meant for filter coffee. And here's the sound of the Smart Grinder Pro. I would say this grinder is dramatically quieter than this one. So I would give this one props. It was hovering about 74 decibels on my phone. Again, not the most accurate reading, but that's how we're comparing both of these two. All right, let's do a sifting test. And one thing I noticed right away, the coarse grounds aren't as consistent. They don't look even. They almost look flat and just chopped up, almost like a blade grinder, where at least the coarse grounds on the Encore looked uniform. So something very, very important to recognize. Let's test this. Let's check this out. All right, yep. So we have about 15 grams on the coarse boulders. And when I say they're boulders, they're funny looking. We have just under 5 grams on our middle sifter, which leaves 0.2 grams on the fines. Say hi, what do you think? Do you think that's consistent? So there are a couple factors on why this could be a little bit more coarse. Now, it could have just been human error, and I could have not dialed this in as much as I thought I did. Take that into consideration. And again, the shape of these coarse grinds aren't pleasant. They're definitely jagged and sharp, which should leave an interesting flavor profile. You won't see that on higher end grinders. So which one should you buy? Well, I think it comes down to 2 things. If you want one grinder that can do both espresso and filter, the Encore is not gonna be able to be that one because it can't brew espresso. It just won't go fine enough. It is more of a coarse grinder and you can get very coarse on this grinder. On the flip side, the Breville Smart Grinder Pro can do both espresso and filter, but I don't think it does anything well. It's kind of a jack of all trades with a master of none. But the Encore is a master of filter coffee for the price. Are there better filter coffee grinders? Yeah, the Virtuoso, the one step up, is a great grinder. Something I'd also like to mention is that you can actually mod the Encore to have the same burrs as the Virtuoso. And you can do that for about $30 to $40. You know, it's a great grinder. It's gonna get you through. On the flip side, you have some extra features on the Smart Grinder Pro that you may benefit from. If that helped you in deciding which grinder to buy, let me know by hitting that like button down below. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. YouTube is telling me about 13% of you who are watching these videos are subscribed. So if you haven't yet, maybe consider subscribing. If you have any questions about either one of these grinders, let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, continue to brew great coffee and continue to brew at home. Peace. We'll see you next time.